Anand Tamboli, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations podcast.
My pleasure, John. Nice to meet you.
Yes, nice to meet you too, and I'm excited to have the chance to talk with you. You hail from Sydney, Australia, so there's a bit of a time difference from where I'm at here in Utah in the United States. I appreciate you meeting with me and having a chance to talk. I just want to briefly share with the listeners a little bit about you. Anand Tamboli is an entrepreneur, award-winning author, global speaker, futurist, and highly sought-after thought leader. He works with organizations that want to transform into a sustainable brand with creative and innovative employees. Anand specializes in areas that intersect with technology and people. He is creative, innovative, entrepreneurial, and a transformation specialist, and is well known for bringing ideas and strategies to life. Being a polymath, he can often shed new light on topics that you think is already done to death. Having worked with several Fortune 500 multinationals for the past 2 decades, he draws upon his cross-industry and multicultural experiences. What a fascinating background. Again, welcome. And is there anything you'd like to add before we jump on into the discussion today?
Well, thanks for this nice introduction, John. Recent work, in fact, involves a lot around future of work or future of businesses, and given the current situation, current scenarios, I think that has become more important. So I see my work drifting more on that side these days.
More towards the future of work?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's always fun when someone is a self-proclaimed futurist. I tell my wife and kids I want to be a futurist when I grow up because it's such an interesting concept. And of course, none of us have a crystal ball. We don't actually know the future, but that's not what being a futurist is all about. How would you define that? For the listeners, what does it mean to be a futurist in today's world?
So I think a lot of people carry it differently. In my view, futurist is basically if you can think out of the box within the context and basically combine multiple scenarios together. Like, for instance, where I typically talk about steeple scenarios, so societal, technological, political, economical, environmental, and legal. And for any particular industry or business, if you can put those things together, saying that, hey, what does it mean for your business? Where can it go as a scenario? And how many scenarios are possible under the circumstances? That, I think, is one perspective. And then businesses or individuals choose that, okay, I don't like this scenario, or I would prefer this one over the other. Then how do I do it in my favor? What can I do to basically move towards closer to the favorable one scenario? So futurist role essentially touches that aspect and then advises that, okay, this is what you might want to do to make that scenario favorable for you.
Yeah, and I think, I do a bit of work, well, quite a bit of work in mapping the last 50 years of the nature of work.
Mhm.
And so I like to think of myself as a bit of a futurist based on historical trends and trajectories, right? We don't know the future, but we can see patterns and we can see the trends and how things have developed over time, and we can see the trajectory of where things are going. Of course, things like a global pandemic can happen, and all of a sudden that shakes things up, and nobody really saw that coming. People saw the possibility of it coming, but nobody, thought when we started 2020 that we were going to be in the middle of a global pandemic. And so you still have to be agile and adaptive, and you can't take anything for granted. But as you look at the past to inform strategy for the future, I think that's what being a futurist is really about. And certainly, we are. I feel like the pandemic is accelerating us towards the future of work that was already inevitable. It was coming. In the next 5 to 10 years, we were going to see more and more automation. We were going to see more and more AI and machine learning driven technologies enhancing the workplace and displacing workers and creating new jobs. We were going to see all of that happen. But I think some of that is already starting to happen simply because the pandemic happened, and now we're being forced to find new and creative and innovative ways to work virtually. We can't travel, and so we're trying to connect with consumers and partners, and we have to rethink supply chains, and all of these things are happening right now that we're kind of, our hand has been forced, that now we have to address these issues when it might have happened a little bit more gradually in coming in, you know, the near future. So that's kind of my general take on it. How does that strike you?
Yeah, look, and I think there's a bit of a exaggeration. A lot of people say that, okay, pandemic has basically accelerated the whole transformation. I think it rather has skewed it. So under the normal circumstances, you would have done certain things in a parallel or in serial manner. But now what has happened? A lot of people have gone digital in terms of working from home or meetings and a number of other things. But then they haven't necessarily changed their working style. So meetings are still meetings. They still take awful amount of time. There's still multiple meetings. People still follow the same red tape or organization structures. So I think it would have happened slightly differently if under the normal circumstances, but it just skewed it, which means there's a lot more work to do after, I wouldn't say after the pandemic ends, but as you come out of it, you will have to kind of adjust this skew to make it proper, and then move towards proper transformation from that angle.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I think that's right. So it'll be interesting to see how organizations adapt, how they respond to the current situations, but also what will be coming forth in the near future. Many opportunities, to be sure, even amidst crisis and amidst the pandemic and kind of global socio-political strife that's happening around most of the world right now. Let's talk about leadership a bit. I know that you have some distinctive thoughts on leadership and why maybe a new model might be necessary. I read your article on distributive leadership. How is it different from other leadership frameworks? Maybe you can describe that for us a little bit and help us understand why that's necessary in today's world.
Yeah, sure. So I think we all have seen in the past centralized leadership, that was the beginning of it in terms of the Industrial Revolution and artifacts, where one entity or one person within your company would have all the rights to authorities to take decisions. Over the period, we converted that into a departmental model or decentralized model, where you could disseminate those decision-making powers as well as execution powers to different pockets within your company. But if you look at what is changing right now, is number one interesting change that's happening in terms of the kind of generations we see in organizations these days. So it's no more just the Gen Xers or baby boomers. So you've got baby boomers at the top of it, with Gen Xers, Y and Z as well entering into the workforce. And fundamentally, these people have different circumstances in which they were born and brought up. Their thinking is different. Where I see that the expectation from leaders is different. A lot of millennials or Gen Zs think that they know what to do. You don't tell me, you don't micromanage me, you just guide me, right? As against, otherwise people would have thought that, okay, tell me what to do. And because of this interesting mix in the workforce, there needs to be a different model than what it was before. Apart from that, and as we spoke earlier, the environment is changing quite fast, where the uncertainty is becoming a norm. It is a norm anyway, volatility and complexity. Now that means you have to be agile. But if you have this decentralized or connected network of leadership, that forms a bottleneck. So how do we break that bottleneck? And which is where I think we have to fundamentally change this idea of leadership just for the decision making and all, and make it more guidance oriented, but the decision making powers could be distributed, and which is where the distributed leadership model or idea came into existence.
Yeah, and I really like the idea of distributed leadership, distributed power, and more open and deliberate communication throughout organizations, more transparency, not so much top-down dictates and decrees. I think we live in a disruptive time, so disruptive technologies, disruptive environments. We have to respond agilely to a lot of different things. And simply put, leaders aren't capable of doing it all themselves. Even if they could do it all themselves, that's not the best way forward to help create buy-in for change, to help employees feel empowered to do their best work. It's such an outdated model of leadership, that the top-down hierarchy kind of tight control model. And so this more distributed approach, I think, really is what the world today needs. And we need to be much more adaptable and agile. And we can only do that as we tap into the potential of all of our people, their creativity and their innovative tendencies, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it looked like we had this notion earlier, and it was true that one person knows it all, others just follow. It's not true anymore. So that's where I think the adaptations is even more crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good. I think another aspect of some of your work that I find really interesting is around the idea of experimentation culture. Again, because we live in a interesting, unique time. The world is so complex. Organizations are struggling to stay competitive in a globalized market. It's a challenging thing to run an organization, and we need to find ways to drive greater levels of productivity. And that can't just happen through putting our thumb on our employees and trying to get them to do more, right? We can't just expect people to work longer hours, to take fewer breaks, to be more productive. We need to create our way and innovate our way into greater productivity. And there are certain contexts, certain environments where leaders can inadvertently actually kind of erode away and remove the initiative and the tendency of employees to be risk-taking and to try to be innovative, whether they, even if they're not intending to do that. Leaders create those types of environments all the time. In contrast, we really need that kind of an experimentation culture. So how do you, when you're working with Fortune 500 multinational firms, how do you talk to leaders about creating that kind of an entrepreneurial environment, that risk-taking environment where you can fall forward, fail fast, learn from what you're doing, and then leverage those learnings into new innovations?
Typically, there's a bit of a dichotomy here, that people understand that they need to be innovative, they need to kind of adapt this fail fast culture and learn new things. At the same time, they are also risk averse. So it's a bit of a jam over here people find themselves. And I often give some of the examples that in other few companies where I worked with. Like for instance, when I worked with LG Electronics, we had this culture of experimentation and innovation. And given the size of the company, it divides a different model, right? And we had this cross-functional teams on the call, where you would be given a new project, and you will sit separately. You'll form almost sort of a new department. So that would be new team, cross-functional team, and it would function autonomously for next 6 months, do all the experimentation required. So even any failure would be contained within that team, within the budget and restrictions. And once it was successful, then they would replicate very, very fast across the organization. So in pockets, it was already being tested, and I saw that model performing really well. So when it comes to the organization now to kind of replicate the same idea, I think the biggest task I had to do is remove those inhibitions, remove those risk-averse sentiments. That how do we address that risk? So so you are satisfied, you are comfortable, and at the same time, how do we move towards being experimental at the same time? That works well, right?
Yeah, I think having those isolated teams that are given the charge to be creative, to push the envelope, to and with the expectation that it very well may fail. It's understood that that may happen, but then being ready to replicate when successes happen, to replicate quickly. That's so important. And actually, it's great to hear of your experience with LG Electronics. I got my start in the world of organizational development and change working in the corporate OD office at LG Electronics in Gumi, South Korea, many years ago. So it's a great company, great organization. Good. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Let's talk a little bit more about experimentation. What do you see organizations doing where they may inadvertently squash the tendency for people to innovate?
So for any innovation per se, I think the three things that are quite important is the first thing is being curious, second is courageous, and third is perseverance. So the first part itself, a lot of organizations try to squash inadvertently again, because curiosity usually goes against the norms. So one is you follow the norms, this is being told, this is how we did things, so you do that. Other is you question that. You start questioning, why are we doing this? What does this serve? Why is it important? How can we do things differently? The moment you start asking questions, which shows your curiosity, we start to say, no, don't ask this question, just do as we say, or this is how we have been doing. But then as we move towards answering those questions and kind of join these people and say that, okay, yeah, let's think about why we have been doing this way, or even is it relevant now? That's where you may have an epiphany, or you may just discover that, okay, this is no more relevant. We might have to change it, or we might have to tweak it. Now, this may be, well, a good finding, but it again needs a next step. So if you find something useful, if you find something that is worth changing, would you do that? Would you change it? That takes courage. Again, the ability to fail and recover and learn from it. So this is where this distributed model helps. But assuming that now have that courage, the company has the courage to take those steps, invest a little bit, considering that it all may go waste or fail. You take that courage, you move forward, and believe in teams on their skill set and knowledge to do their best rather than micromanaging. Something good mostly comes out. It's rare that everything fails. You always learn something out of it. And once you do that, if you have a perseverance rather than, okay, show me a quick result rather than giving it due course, due time, then you will see some results. You may want to go from A to B, but you don't end up at B, you end up at B dash or maybe C. Who knows? Like C may be better than B. But you wouldn't know it unless you start that journey. So feeding curiosity with courage and courage to the perseverance. Once we have these three things, the innovation becomes really bearable and realistic. Combine that with experimentation culture and this environment, because eventually environment that leaders create will dictate the performance.
Yes, absolutely. The culture and the environment is absolutely key. We can't micromanage. We can't dictate everything that needs to occur. And you mentioned earlier Gen Z and millennial workers. They want to be in that environment where they can be empowered to be creative, to innovate, and get coached and mentored along the way, get regular feedback, but where they're not being told every little thing to do, and they're not really interested in doing something just because that's the way it's always been done. If they have an idea and it seems to make sense, they want to be able to run with it. They want to try it out. And I think that in part, that's what an experimentation culture is all about, is creating that environment where people feel safe, they feel empowered, where there are many opportunities to collaborate, where people can share ideas and have things connect in ways that maybe they hadn't previously considered. That's where the greatest innovations come. Not when we're siloed into our own little areas of expertise, but when we have the opportunity to have ideas bounce off of various types of contexts. So I think it's so vital, and we see so many organizations who they want innovation, they want creativity, but then they have policies, practices, and procedures within the organization. They have the red tape that's in place that either discourages it or almost makes it completely impossible. And so we have to find a new way. We have to find a way for really, I mean, and I get it, it's hard, especially when you have a really large multinational firm. It's really hard to be agile, to be adaptive, but we have to find a way to do that, because otherwise we're going to squash this experimentation culture, and we'll lose our best people, those people who are driven by the opportunity to innovate.
Yeah, and you would have seen that lots of millennials or even Gen Z, the average employment span within a company is way different than other people, and primarily because of this, that they quickly sense that it is not working for them, and then they basically change for something else, and they keep changing until they find something useful. Fortunately, pandemic has kind of forced these large organizations to think in a different terms. Earlier, I have seen that large organizations usually are very, very risk averse, so that factor almost overshadows the experimentation or innovation part. But if you look at from a cost and benefit analysis perspective, the cost is too high to take any action. Here, as you said, the pandemic has forced the hand, so they had to do it. They had to kind of let people decide for themselves when they want to work, how they want to deal with situations without having a formal leadership oversee them all the time. So this experiment was kind of forced upon, and a lot of people have learned from it that, okay, yeah, it works, right? If they kind of put in their best efforts, it will even work better. So I think this is where we have to see it from that perspective.
Excellent. It has been a real pleasure talking with you today. Before we wrap up and close this episode, I do want to give you a chance to share with the listeners how they can connect with you and learn more about you and the work that you're doing and the services that you offer. Would you mind sharing that with us?
My pleasure. Well, look, I'm quite active on LinkedIn, so please feel free to share, connect with me on LinkedIn, or connect with me on my website. I frequently write for publications. I frequently write on my website as well. Lots of my books are available for free to download, or pretty much cheap, or coffee cost, I would say. So do download them, have a look at them. And when you look at all these materials, when you look at all these thought processes, you will see that if it resonates with you, feel free to talk to me and see how we can work together.
Wonderful. Well, I encourage my listeners to learn more about you, reach out, have a good discussion. I think in this world, this environment that we're in right now, we need more opportunities to connect to think about things in new ways. I love the distributed leadership approach. I love the experimentation culture aspects that we talked about. I think those are so vital in organizations. So I hope my listeners will take the opportunity to connect with you and learn more from what you're doing. Thank you so much for chatting with me today, and I hope you stay healthy and safe in Australia, and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.
It was an honor, John. Thank you so much.